Welcome to Producer Showcase. I'm your host, Debbie Salmon, and on this showcase, I'm joined by Aleida Wahn, an attorney, true crime writer, and legal analyst here in San Diego. Aleida attends a lot of criminal trials looking for information for some of the most compelling cases. She has worked at the San Diego County District Attorney's Office in family law and in criminal post-conviction law. Dr. Brian Alman, PhD, is one of the leading mind-body stress experts in the world using clinically proven mindfulness and self-efficacy tools. Brian is the author of several books on stress management and has coached thousands across the globe with his simple but powerful self-efficacy techniques. So thank you both for joining me. It's great to have you here. Well, it's very interesting to me how your two areas of expertise overlap. And what I think what we need to really start off with is kind of an unusual example, which is an animal cruelty case. So I just need to warn our viewers that we're going to start with a news package, and it does have some disturbing images.
There's new information tonight about a local man accused of torturing and even disfiguring his next-door neighbor's dogs. Today, trial got underway for David Herbert. Our 10 News anchor Vanessa Benhefti is joining us from the Vista Courthouse. And Vanessa, he decided to represent himself.
Yeah, the accused attacker told the jury that he didn't do it, that police have the wrong guy. But prosecutors here today say they have the evidence, they have the video to prove it.
Smaller machine.
Navy veteran David Herbert is representing himself, charged with torturing and maiming several of his neighbor's dogs, even gouging out this husky's eye and pouring acid on another.
I've never been in trouble with the law, and that's it. I'm going to fight to the very end. That's it. Thank you.
But prosecutors say they have several smoking guns, a bloody bat, and saliva samples with doggy DNA taken from Herbert's car and home. The most compelling, surveillance video of a missing dog, Lala. You can see Herbert driving away with the retriever mix, never to be seen again. The owner testifying the dog was her daughter's therapy pet.
Their father passed away, and she was there for Natalie through that.
Other neighbors detailed the horror inflicted on these two huskies. One dumped at Camp Pendleton, and when that failed, Herbert allegedly broke into their home, gouging out one dog's eye and forcing another to ingest antifreeze.
Hold him accountable. Hold him accountable for his behavior. Hold him accountable for what he did to Lala, to Kikoyo, to Australia. Hold him accountable for the animal abuse and the cruelty.
And both families say that they moved out of fear. Meantime, Herbert faces up to 16 years in prison if convicted. Reporting live from Vista, Vanessa Benhefti, 10 News.
Okay, so Aleida, I'd like to start with you. What happened in the David Herbert case? You were there.
Yes, I was inside the courtroom. And this case is heartbreaking, and it's also terrifying. So David Herbert is a Navy veteran who would break into his neighbor's home while they were gone and torture, abuse, and really seriously injure their dogs. So two separate families lived next door to him. The first family had two dogs, two Siberian Huskies, Kikoyo and Australia. And this poor family was subjected to 4 months of increasing terror. So basically, they had attacks not just on their dogs, but also on their vehicles, because he was repeatedly slashing their tires. So they were reporting these attacks to the police, but they had no idea that it was David Herbert, their next door neighbor. So they didn't know who was doing this. But the attacks became more severe. They became more aggressive over time, with the worst being when the mother came home one day and she found that both dogs had been burned with acid. And so, I mean, this was horrifying to them. Right. But then it got even worse, if you can believe that. And the unthinkable happened when she came home with her 4-year-old son and found that Australia's eye had been gouged out. And so, I mean, when I first heard that, I couldn't even fathom that, because that sounded like the worst thing that could possibly happen.
Right, and any dog lover would be so deeply disturbed by that, to come home and find, one of your family members essentially, tortured that way. So. Right,
it was horrible. So this poor dog, of course, goes into emergency surgery, and then the family now is terrified, and they move out immediately from that house. Right. So now a second family moves into this house, and they don't know about anything that's happened. And they had two dogs, Prince and Lala. And these poor dogs now, they literally last 2 days before they disappear. So the mother at the sentencing hearing actually told David Herbert, "You attacked us within 48 hours. You didn't even give us a chance to unpack." So that's how fast it was. So this family comes home, their dogs are gone, they have no idea where they've gone, but they eventually do find prints, but Lala, their golden retriever, to this day has never been found. So this has been over a year ago. And so Lala was last seen on surveillance video inside David Herbert's car being driven away, and the police ended up finding Lala's blood inside the car and also on a baseball bat. And so at this point in time, it's presumed that she's dead.
Right.
And so, of course, the family is heartbroken. This was a support dog to the daughter because her father had died, and it was just a dog that she really, really loved and had given her so much support and love through this really terrible time.
Right.
So this family is beyond heartbroken, and they want David Herbert just to tell them, where is she? What did you do with her?
Right, because sometimes that's the worst, not knowing what's happened,
Yes.
right? I mean, sometimes you can deal with a death or something you can see, but when they just disappear, you know, it's just that wide open terror. What happened? What were their final moments like? So, okay, so tell me, so then what happened? It sounds like there was some evidence. So what happened in the legal case, the court case?
Okay, so there was a 2-week trial, and David Herbert decided to represent himself, and he was convicted, and the jury found that he was guilty of 6 counts of felony animal cruelty, 4 counts, of vandalism, and 1 count of burglary, and he was ultimately sentenced to almost 10 years in prison.
Wow. Okay, so in my mind, the penalty, you know, that fits the crime. I mean, you know, it's good that he's actually getting some time served. A lot of times I think you see things and you think cases of animal cruelty and people get away with it scot-free, or there certainly is no punishment, which is very upsetting. Before we go any further on the David Herbert case, I want to bring Brian in here because I want to talk about the adverse childhood experiences study that you've been involved in. So can you give us a little bit of a background on the study?
Yes, so the study is from San Diego at Kaiser Permanente, and Dr. Vincent Felitti is the co-principal investigator. And I've been working as part of the treatment solution team for the study. The study has 1.3 million people in it,
Wow.
and it looks at people's early childhood experiences from birth to 18, asks 10 questions to find out about their early childhoods, yes or no questions, and based on the answers to 10 questions, they were able to predict what people would do to cope with the difficult experiences they had as kids. Would they become smokers, drinkers, drug users, become obese? How would they cope with those difficult childhood experiences? And then able to predict what illnesses they would get from their coping skills and also from stuffing all those emotions down into their bodies and really getting their immune systems quite dysfunctional. And then what age they would die. To actually be able to tell from birth to 18, your life experience is going to predict basically your entire emotional and medical health.
Okay, so, and Brian, you provided me with some of these charts that I kind of want to show that shows actually the full spectrum of biomedical disease and social and emotional disorder. So if we've got these A-study correlates where childhood trauma is equal to poor health and dysfunction, how does that relate to animal cruelty? How do we come back to David Herbert? Why would he do this?
Well, the 10 questions in the A study, one of them, were you or anybody in your family physically abused? Okay, so that would be a yes or a no. So clearly with this person, the answer would have been yes. We can predict that. Was there any alcoholism in the family? Most likely. Drug addiction, incarceration, suicide. So yes or no questions were able to predict very often what the person will repeat themselves, because people that abuse animals, just like people who sexually abuse kids, were abused themselves. It's not a normal thing that somebody, I'm going to go do that. It's an internal repression, usually of years of bad experiences, that then come out and get acted out and projected onto innocent people or innocent animals. So we know where these people come from. They're trained in their families. It's not because of social media. It's not because of things they read about. These kinds of people are trained at home.
Right. And so here you have, Mr. Herbert, who is able to be in the Navy. I mean, I would have thought, oh, war veteran, thank you for your service, that sort of thing. But it turns out now later in life, this kind of, antisocial, angry, abusive behavior is coming out.
Well, what happens also is that people that have had very difficult adverse childhood experiences look to the military to be a better family, to go join, to be part of a group, to serve, and to feel the safety and the comfort. And it doesn't really turn out like that. It's real people with real traumas of their own, real conflicts. They're fighting in a war, they're getting deployed, they're seeing things and doing things they'd be arrested for here. And so it's not that, oh, I'll go to a better family given that I was raised like this. It's actually more conflict and more trauma and more difficulty. So it doesn't usually work out like that. Again, it comes from their adverse childhood experiences.
And you're talking about significant traumas. This isn't, I didn't get the Nike tennis shoes I wanted, or someone stole my backpack. I mean,
no,
the list of things you went through is
significant in that I would say maybe 3/4 of us have been through these. Many of us have had traumas in our childhood. Divorce is a trauma, separation, depression, anxiety, mental illness in the family. That's traumatic to kids growing up. So it doesn't have to be something like sexual abuse, although that's another. It can simply be neglect, abandonment. It can be divorce, separation, depression, anxiety. I really actually don't know anybody that didn't have this in their family. If not their mother and dad, an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, a cousin. It's really...
They've seen it if they weren't living with it in their very own household. They were still touched by it, or someone in their household was touched by it.
And most people are raised, don't air your dirty laundry. So don't say anything. If your mom's an alcoholic, don't say anything. If your father's depressed and not going, don't say anything. Just say he's out of work. So this is all internalized, kept inside, until years, decades later, it gets acted out in cases like this. And we read about them every day in the news, whether it's a priest or it's a teacher or a doctor or a physician at the university or whoever it is. This is really, it's in our lives all the time.
Right. So did David Herbert have any of an explanation? Did he have remorse? I mean, what was his, what actually happened at the sentencing then?
Well, his attorney raised 3 separate issues at his sentencing that really stood out to me. And one of them was that he was a combat veteran who had been deployed to Iraq. And his attorney said he had been shot at, he had withstood mortar attacks, that he had dodged grenades every night. So he'd been in this severe environment. And then he also said that he was a medical corpsman who was out there rendering aid to the injured. So he saw terrible things on the battlefield. So that was one thing he raised. The second thing he raised was that he had depressive disorder. And he said that was a major depressive disorder, in fact. And then the third thing that he raised was childhood abuse. So what that childhood abuse was, I don't know, because it was not disclosed in open court. Okay. So it was contained in a psychologist report that was sealed with the court, and so only the judge and the attorneys could read that, and they didn't reveal what that was. So I don't know what it would be, and that would be interesting to know that.
Right.
But David Herbert also did say that he, during the trial, not at the sentencing hearing, he said that he has nothing against animals, that which is hard to believe, right? But he said it's that he expects people that own these animals, the owners, to have consideration for other people. And there was testimony that he felt that the neighbors were too loud or the music was bothering him. And so this is how he reacted.
I don't see the golden retriever turning on the stereo, though. You know what I mean? It's kind of interesting where he acts out his frustration at people on the animals, in a way, is what it sounds like.
And he also had all this anger, which was even predated these attacks, because 4 years before he attacked the dogs, he actually got into another dispute with a neighbor, and he slashed her tires. So that was one thing. And then he also had sent these threatening emails to his homeowners association. They had levied some fines against him, and he didn't like that. He didn't like the fines. He wanted them removed. And so he sent these threatening emails. One said, remove these fines or I'm going to rip up this block. We're going to settle this problem in the street. And then a third one actually said, expect World War III, because not just in my front yard, but within the entire blankety blank neighborhood. So this was somebody that was like filled with anger and almost rage. You could say that's almost rage. If you're threatening World War III because you're upset about some violations that you want them to remove. I mean, that was something that was missed in
Right, and there's a pattern of escalation, it sounds like there. So is that typical, Brian? How does the childhood trauma kind of reveal itself?
It is. People like this are oftentimes walking time bombs, that they're actually looking for situations to get it out, to act it out, to be harmful towards somebody else or an animal. And yes, these people, the neighbors knew who he was. A lot of this really could have been prevented. The community that he was threatening knew that this person was out of control, irrational, dangerous, and a more proactive approach could have been taken so that this kind of thing could be prevented. That's essential in this case, in all of the cases.
Right, it's something that a lot of people want to avoid it. I mean, you mentioned it's like we don't talk about the abuse, and then we don't we don't want to face the anger. It's uncomfortable, so we look away. We go in our houses and shut the door, and then something like this happens.
Dr. Folletti actually mentioned to me when we were talking about this kind of case is that there's a gentleman's handshake, that you just don't bring up the person's upbringing. You blame it on the social media, you blame it on the veterans. I've worked with veterans my entire career at National University and private clients. They bond with these dogs. They bond with animals. It is a saving relationship for them to get that unconditional love and support, and it's really the opposite. So to blame the military and being deployed, I don't know of any other case. So it's usually quite the opposite. But there is an agreement. Just don't ask about the person's father.
Right.
Don't ask about his mother. Don't ask. That's personal.
That's off limits.
That's off limits. So, and yet that's always the roots.
Right.
So there's a very small chance of any of this ever getting resolved if we blame it on social media and being deployed and all that.
We don't look at the root cause.
We're not paying attention to the root causes, and so really nothing improves.
Right.
Generation after generation after generation.
Exactly.
Right.
So the takeaway from the David Herbert case, what does his conviction and a pretty stiff penalty tell us about how society is seeing these actions or these behaviors that he's done?
Well, I think that we are seeing a heightened protection of animals, and on a national level and also here in California. So on a national level, the FBI actually now is tracking animal cruelty just like they track homicide. And so they've designated its own category for that, whereas in the past, animal cruelty was just lumped in with other crimes. And now it actually has its own category, and they're really wanting to find out who is abusing these animals and what is the abuse. And so they're compiling all this data, and this started in 2016. And the reason why they decided to do this is that they found that this crime is not just a crime against animals, but it's a crime against society, because they see that there's a link between animal cruelty and human abuse and other violent crimes. Right. So there is a new federal law that's being proposed right now, and that would make animal cruelty a felony nationwide. And it's called PACT, P-A-C-T, which stands for Prevention of Animal Cruelty and Torture Act. And so under this act, anybody who is convicted of intentionally crushing, burning, suffocating, impaling, or doing anything seriously harming an animal, would face federal charges. They can federal felony charges, and that they could be sentenced up to 7 years in prison and receive fines. And this whole law is actually building on the 2010 law of the animal crush video prohibition. And so under that law, there were people that were actually filming the torture and killing of animals and then distributing those videos. So that law
prohibits the distribution, right?
Yes.
So they stopped them from selling and transacting the video, but not necessarily the animal. This is now the follow-on, which now makes the animals the center part of the law. The cruelty itself is now the issue.
The act itself is now will be prohibited if this law passes. And so right now, this bill has been introduced into the House, and that was introduced in January of 2019, so this year, and the House has now sent it on to a subcommittee as of March. So it's making its way through the legislative process. And actually, the Humane Society has on their website some sample letters and forms that people can fill out to send to their congressman to say, please support this law, make it pass.
And I think, we'll talk a little bit later about things we can do, but I think that's certainly one of them in terms of supporting legislation. And whether someone is watching this program at the time that we're filming it, or they're watching it later, that's always something you can be mindful of, is looking at what the current legislation is and getting out there and supporting these kinds of protections for children and for animals, really. Right. You mentioned the crush videos, and I didn't know what they were until we talked about this before the show. And to me, that's just the notion that you would take a small a puppy or a kitten or something, and crush it for enjoyment. I mean, Brian, can you help me understand what is that would be meaningful or valuable to someone?
Well, abuse and abuse videos or things that people do, whether it's humans or animals, they can become very popular. It's a way of the perpetrator really getting out their anger, their rage, their own craziness from their childhoods, from their upbringings, and it's violent, it's dangerous, it's deadly. And the people that would watch those or be intrigued by those are also in that same category, trying to get it out, express it, release it. So it seems absurd, and it is absurd, but it comes from a place of absurdity where they've been the victims themselves, and now they're victimizing, so there's some release, like a person who has been, treated horribly, treating a spouse, a child horribly too. It's not rational.
But they're
logical.
Depersonalized, they lack empathy.
It's emotional chaos and craziness inside that they don't know how to release. They've tried drinking, they've tried drugs, they've tried eating, they've tried bar fights, they've tried bullying, and nothing really resolves it because none of those things will resolve it. It's really an emotional issue at a deep level that needs real help. And so that's what's happening with those horrible videos and
horrific.
Yeah.
So how commonplace is animal abuse? How big a problem is animal cruelty?
Well, the San Diego District Attorney's Office has released some statistics that in a 4-year time frame, they have prosecuted 248 cases of animal cruelty. So that breaks down to 62 cases a year if you want to just divide it. But now they are actually making it an even higher priority. And they have this new unit who is being a lot more aggressive. And they have already reviewed 33 cases that they told me in the last 2 months. And out of those 33 cases, they have filed charges in 23 cases.
Wow.
So it's really becoming a top priority for them. So some other information that the San Diego District Attorney's Office gave me was that they said studies have shown that 43% of school shooters have had animal cruelty in their background.
That's a
high
percentage,
yes.
Yeah.
And I was very surprised because I'm like, that's almost 50%. So that's a really high statistic if you have 43%.
Right. And it kind of makes you wonder if someone noticed the animal abuse, they could forestall the school shootings. You know what I mean? Like if we were more observant or, more aware of these animal cruelty things developing in a person, could we circumvent some of these horrific
There are always
mass shootings?
Red flags. There are always signals, like from childhood. You always know the kids that are going to be hurting the animals and that'll go on to hurt other people. So if we pay close attention and we try to help, teachers, counselors, people at church, friends, parents, really reach out to try to help these people because they are crying out for help. They're doing it in a way that's dangerous and very bad for people and for animals, but we all have to be more proactive when we see people struggling like that because they are signaling. We know the animals are getting hurt.
Right.
And we know they're going to go hurt other people.
And they're on their way to something worse.
That is.
You're
it
right.
just keeps going. Right? Yeah.
Right.
It's almost impossible for them to stop. They're so compelled to get out what was done to them that it's almost impossible for them to stop themselves.
Right. And in some of the reading that I did for this, I think there was something about serial killers. There's a very high correlation that most serial killers started with animals before they graduated to...
Well, in a sense, they're easier victims because they're not going to tell. So these perpetrators have even, like a young child, I mean, they have victims that aren't going to report them. And that's part of the getting out and doing really bad things and basically hurting others the way that they were hurt.
Right.
Yeah.
So we've talked about some pretty significant and horrific stuff, and I want to leave the viewers with something that's a little bit hopeful. What can we do? How can we intercept these children in the phase of childhood trauma? How can we redirect their behaviors and their emotional stability?
Well, the first thing is to understand that now more and more people are taking the ACE questions through schools. It's in 100 countries. So people are being asked about their childhood so treatment solutions can happen. The biggest outcome and the most positive outcome of the ACE study is that parenting classes are the most important thing. So training parents to be better parents, to look for the problems, to get the kids to express their emotions, to handle things better than their parents handled them, so they don't just pass it on. So parenting classes turn out to be number one, because as we know, we all have gone through a lot of stress in our lives. It's all how we deal with those stressors. And so if we repress them, internalize them, it works on us mentally, emotionally, physically. We get sick and take it out on other people. So there's a need for all of us to find ways to deal with our stress better, whether it's walking, friendship, musical instrument, journaling, yoga.
Emotional wellness,
Emotional wellness,
Right,
reading books, taking workshops, taking classes. So there's a real need for all of us to realize human beings are not primarily rational beings where they do what they should. We're emotionally driven. So we really need to be sensitive to how emotional everybody is. And so when you hurt somebody and put them down and make them feel bad, it's going to backfire. We have to be more encouraging, more supportive. That's sort of the interesting thing about this horrific case, is that some of us get our most unconditional loving experiences from our pets.
Right.
From our dogs. They
Right.
love us unconditionally. We love them.
Exactly.
And so the relationship is so healthy, so positive, and so loving, so important and long term, that's even a solution for some of these kids before they become, offenders, is get them around animals, get them to experience that giving and receiving of love. So it really is about parenting, dealing with emotions, understanding how sensitive human beings are, and being proactive when you see problems and rallying around those people. I'm not sure punishment's the right idea. I think it's more education and love and care and support.
Well, because that's what I was thinking about when you were saying that, actually. When you see a family, I mean, there are a lot of people that I think they aspire to be the best parents they can be, and they look for opportunities to improve. But when you have someone who has a depressive illness or is suicidal or has come from an incarcerated situation and they come home, are they the people they're going to reach out for parenting tips? Probably not, because they're already living out their own cycle. So how can we help those families?
It's the same answer, though. It's really rallying around those people, whether you're a cousin or a neighbor or a friend, or you go to church with them or you take classes with them, is to be more supportive of people emotionally. And a lot of times the more troubled somebody is, like you're saying, the more support they need. So we all have to rally around people and be more supportive so that they can get emotionally healthier.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to read this quote from Alice Walker that you gave me because I want to get it right, but it says, "They do not want to hear what their children suffer. They've made the telling of the suffering itself taboo." And I think that's an important thing, that we need to shine a light, on some of this stuff and not let it kind of fester in the darkness, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess a final thing, Brian, I'd like to ask you to share with us your last row technique.
Okay.
I found that really interesting.
Yes.
I think that gives a lot of hope for...
Right. So very simply, when people are stressed, and we all get stressed as we agreed, there's basically 3 steps that people can do to relieve their stress. People can try this. Everybody should be doing this. And one of the questions, Debbie, also is the corporate wellness is common. Most companies now have corporate wellness programs. I'm not sure if they're dealing with the emotions, probably eating and exercise, but schools are starting to have wellness programs where it is more emotional. So the first thing is we have to accept when we are upset. So if you're mad at your parents, or you're mad at your friends, or you're mad at yourself, whatever it is, or you get afraid, whatever emotion you have, The number one move of these three is to accept whatever you feel and find a way to express it. Whether it's journaling or talking with a friend or anything you can do, but get it
Release
out.
it,
So
right.
number one, don't try to not feel. Don't try to not be afraid. Don't try to not be stressed. Don't try to not be angry. Do the opposite. Actually accept what you feel. And the reason I call it the last row is I think about your feelings as sort of the movie of your life. So what's happening in your movie? Well, I'm really afraid or I'm really
Or
upset.
the chaos, right?
Accept it and express it. So that's the first step. Second step is you imagine going back to the 15th row of the theater. The 15th
Little distance,
row
a little perspective.
is where, but most people think for meditation and mind-body healing, just step back and it'll be better. Usually when you step back, you tend to be critical.
Oh, okay.
Here's what's wrong with
The
me.
critic.
Yeah, here's the critic. I'm going to judge myself for feeling what I feel. And that judge that we have towards our own feelings, our own movie, and towards other people, most people try to get rid of that also. But that 15th row judge critic has a lifetime membership.
Right.
Nobody gets rid of it. It's with all of us. About 10% of it's very useful, but 90% of it will drive you crazy while you're focusing on what's wrong with everybody.
And it distracts you from the real,
So
dealing with the real
all
problem.
of your judgments, all your criticisms, you have to express those. Again, whether it's writing, talking, journaling, singing, dancing, you have to get that out. Then the third step, and this is the last row. So you're not in your movie anymore, although you have all your feelings, they're with you. You have your 15th row judge. Now you imagine going back to the very last row of the theater. So now you're observing the critic and you're observing the movie. And that last row perspective, as if we're in the last row right now, is relaxing. It's your own inner wisdom. It's where you'll find your own best answers of how to deal with your movie and your stress, how to deal with your judge. This is really your true, authentic self. Your judge is your training by your mother, father, school, friends. Your movie or your feelings, we're all sensitive. We've all agreed on that. So as much as possible, you want your last row perspective to become dominant and your 15th row critic and your movie and your feelings to become non-dominant instead of the other way around.
Right.
Most people are dominant emotionally, dominant judge, non-dominant creative, imaginative, inner wisdom. We're saying do the opposite again. Get to your last row perspective, get to your inner wisdom, your inner wise woman, and that's where you'll find your own best answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that insight.
You're welcome.
And I thank you both for being here. And Aleida, thank you for bringing this important topic forward. And I hope that all of our viewers have enjoyed this showcase and that you got something and you can see the correlation in this animal cruelty case and early childhood trauma. So thanks for watching us and join us next time on Producer Showcase. Thank you.